One of the greatest ideas of all time, evolution, the theory of natural selection, not only is it, how would you say, right.
Welcome to GS Podcast number 10, finally in double digits. I'm very fortunate to have Terry Sanderson on the show today. He's the president of the National Secular Society. He got active in campaigning for equality and human rights sometime in the 60s and just hasn't stopped, basically. So he's going to be detailing secularism for us, telling us exactly what campaigns the National Secular Society are working on, and more importantly, how you can help as well. If you feel inspired or just as passionate as Terry in the National Secular Society about the issues raised in this episode, please consider logging on to the National Secular Society website and becoming a member. If you do so, let me know. I want to hear about that as well. Maybe you're not based in the UK, that's fine. Just seek out your local secular organisation or humanist group and let me know about that too. I'll also be doffing my cap in the direction of those kind enough to support my podcast by donating to the hosting costs at the end of the show. You can do that by visiting gspellchecker.wordpress.com. Enjoy the show. Thrilled to have with me Terry Sanderson, President of the NSS. Hello, Terry.
Hello, good afternoon or morning or whatever time of day you're listening to this.
Yeah, it's a Sunday, so I'm assuming you've been to church this morning.
Absolutely.
I think it's either that or sit through BBC's Big Question, so I'm not sure what's preferable.
Go for a walk in the park.
Yeah, definitely. Third option's always good. I was wondering if you could give us a bit of background on yourself, Terry. Let us know how you got involved in campaigning for secularism. What sort of steered you in that path?
Yeah. Well, I started out really as a campaigner for gay rights back in the late 60s, early 70s. And that gave me a grounding in how to campaign effectively on an issue that's not really very popular. And certainly gay rights weren't very popular then. But you can see the kind of progress we've made on that issue. But all through that period, I'd recognized that religion was one of the main enemies of everybody's rights, not just gay people's rights, but certainly as far as gay people were concerned, all the opposition seemed to be coming from religious sources. So I've always felt strongly that religion needed to not quite to be put in its place, but to have some of its privileges removed and to take some of the sting out of it when it comes to imposing itself on other people. So that's how I got involved in, first of all, humanism, and then I sort of began to think about it more and realized that secularism was probably the most sensible and achievable way to get religion off our backs, if you like, and back where it belongs, in the churches and in people's houses and in people's heads, and not in other people's beds and in their private lives. So that's really what led me to the NSS, and I've kind of refined my ideas since the beginning. I was, very, very much a Dawkinsian atheist for a while, and then realised that although it's very good to argue with religious people, it doesn't actually get you very far. Much better to try and campaign in a political way to achieve freedom from religion in a more practical way. You're never going to eliminate religion altogether. There'll always be somebody who's attracted to it. So it's much better to try and live with them than to try and eradicate their ideas.
I'm a member of the NSS myself. I'm a huge admirer of the work you do there and the campaigning. Actually, I say I'm a member. My renewal forms just came through the door, so I need to. I've actually heard you send Dawkins door to door unless they're returned promptly. So I need to get on with that. Doing a bit of research. Obviously, I gravitated towards Wikipedia. No expenses spared. There's a few things listed on your career that are missing citation, so I thought we could clear that up. One being that you was a psychiatric counsellor at some point.
Yes, I was a counsellor in a psychiatric hospital for a while, and that led me because I originally came from Rotherham, and when I moved to London to join my life partner, we I worked in a psychiatric hospital as a counsellor, and that led me to working on Woman's Own magazine, where I was taken under the wing of Claire Rayner on their problem page, and I worked there for a while, and it was a bit of an education. So that got me into journalism, and I got the writing bug, if you like. Wrote a few books, and that basically is where I am. I'm retired now from that kind of work, but I enjoyed it while I was doing it.
That's great. That was going to be my second uncited fact about Woman's Own magazine as well. So two birds with one stone there. So yeah, if anyone's listening who knows how to edit a wiki entry, you can send them to this podcast for the citation. Okay, so what does the NSS mean by the word secularism, and what do they hope to achieve in view of that?
Yeah, I mean, secularism is a word that can be used in several different ways, and it's often misrepresented by people who want to undermine it. Secularism is not atheism. Secularism is really about separating politics from religion, the state from the church. And if you look at where secularism is part of the legal structure of a country, such as in America or in France, you can see how it works in practice. You actually have a government that says no religion, no particular religious denomination can take control of the government, because we know what happens when that does occur. You can see it in the Middle East, where you've got Islam in charge of several countries that are really tyrannical, and we don't want that to happen in this country. It's not likely in the near future, but it can happen. We've seen it before. We had a sort of semi-theocracy operating in Ireland for most of the last century, and we saw where that led. You know, the Catholic Church became overmighty, and it became the state in a sense. The state was almost deferential towards the Catholic Church, and that led to the Magdalene laundries and a huge amount of child abuse. It's only just being uncovered now. So secularism stops religion taking temporal power, if you like, stops religion taking over the government, so that human rights can apply to everybody. We can all enjoy the same rights, and there is no privilege for any particular religion. That's my understanding of secularism. Of course, it's got an awful lot of shades, because French secularism is not quite the same as American secularism, and American secularism is not quite the same as Turkish secularism. So there are lots of different shades of secularism, but basically the bottom line is you keep religion and politics separate from each other.
Absolutely. I mean, that brings to the attention one of the main focuses I've noticed of the National Secular Society's faith schools and the role they play in society. I believe I'm right in thinking a third of publicly funded schools in the UK are faith schools. Yes,
and growing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Church of England has made it quite clear that it intends to fully exploit this new system of free schools and academies, which permit individual sponsors to take over the running of these schools from local authorities, and the church is taking them over hand over fist. So the number of church schools is going up very quickly indeed.
I remember the NSS campaigning against faith schools from the get-go, and I think some of the fears that were outlined then have actually started to manifest already. Yeah. I mean, we've had a few instances of late of academies being closed, haven't we, I think?
Yes, it was. That was the one in Derby where the Islamic Board of Governors, Board of Governors in the school, who tried to impose a kind of very strict Islamic doctrine onto the school. And when people started to object, Mr. Gove and the Department of Education realized that they'd handed this school over to a bunch of fanatics, and they had to close it basically, because that they've got rules that say that they're watching for schools being taken over by unsuitable people. But obviously that one was taken over under false pretenses, and as soon as they got their hands on it, the loonies moved in and started to take over. But fortunately it was spotted, and taken back. But there are lots of other schools around the country that are in the hands of some very suspect religious people.
Yeah, that is concerning. I mean, what are the main challenges you see that are posed to a fair, objective education by faith schools?
Well, I think this free school and academy approach, which gives the school sponsors a completely free hand to run the school in any way they want to, allows them to put an undue emphasis on religion if that's their purpose. They can devote far more time to religion than an ordinary state school that's in the control of a local authority would. And I think that the fact that the government is so determined to press ahead with this system means that a lot more schools will become academies and free schools, and we'll see a rise in extremism in schools, I think. Although you see, the government doesn't regard it as extremism when a religious group takes over a school and starts to teach creationism or pseudo-creationism. They seem to think that's a reasonable thing to do, and although they've got an official policy that says no creationism in science lessons, these determined Islamists and Christians have got ways and means of insinuating it in when they've got control. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't allow these schools to drift into becoming centers of religious indoctrination, which is certainly what some of the Islamic schools are becoming. And there's a story only today in the Daily Telegraph about the situation in where is it? It's in Birmingham, where a note was uncovered which seemed to suggest that there was a conspiracy to take over schools, to Islamify them, and to pack the board of governors with religious extremists who would then dictate what the school taught. And although there's some suspicion now that this document is not entirely trustworthy, the Daily Telegraph has done some digging and found that actually there is a conspiracy amongst some very determined extremist Muslims to make sure that schools are run on very strict Islamic lines. Now, to me, that is not what education is about. It's not in order to hand over schools to people who want to indoctrinate children. So I think you have to be very careful with the education system. The way it's going, I'm very worried that we're going to have an increase in this kind of religious extremism appearing in schools. The government doesn't seem to be concerned about it. It seems to think it's a good thing. Religion is a good thing, whether it's extreme or not.
I mean, it was only recently we read that there was the Jewish school that was redacting questions in the GCSE exams on evolution. Yeah. And perhaps you can clear this up for me, because I have a little bit of difficulty understanding. I mean, the most concerning aspect of that for me was it was actually agreed with the exam board that they could do that. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And the government seems to think it's okay too. But I just can't understand this. I just can't get my head round the fact that the government is prepared to go along with, removing facts and from a child's education. Yeah. It just baffles me entirely. They seem to think that because it's a Jewish school, it's culturally, they don't believe in evolution religiously, and therefore it shouldn't be taught, even in science lessons. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. But we're in the hands of a government who seem to be prepared to allow this kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, I'm fairly certain you agree with the viewpoint that religion's a huge part of society and it absolutely should be taught in schools, but obviously the line should be drawn between education and indoctrination.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty, because they will deny that they're indoctrinating children, even though they're inviting, even the Christian schools are inviting evangelists in to fill the gaps in their religious education duties, because, of course, the Education Act of 1944 said that religious education would be a mandatory subject in every school, and that there would be an act of worship every day in which children will take part, not will be present at, but will take part in. In other words, children in schools are supposedly forced to pray every single day. Of course, a lot of schools don't do it, and they can't find the teachers who are interested enough to do it, because teachers are like the rest of society; they're losing interest in religion. It's very strange that as religious adherence plummets, the number of faith schools begins to increase. It just makes no sense, this anomaly of the increase of religious influence and the decrease in religious attachment.
Yeah, it's entirely disproportionate and not in keeping with, to me, what British values are. Anyway,
no.
Just the example, the fact that we have 26 bishops, unelected bishops in the House of Lords, all of which are male as well.
Yeah, but of course that emanates from the Church of England's own hierarchical structure, which forbids female bishops at the moment, although they're about to change that, I understand. So, there couldn't be any women bishops. No doubt there will be when they do get women bishops, but it would be the same issue, the fact that there are religious representatives in our legislature simply because they're bishops, not because they've done anything wonderful. Some of them are as thick as planks, and that they're sitting in our legislature making law. You read some of the debates in the House of Lords and look at some of the comments that these bishops make, and you think, where the hell did they dig this lot up from?
Yeah, that's the issue with clergy. For some reason, the outfits they automatically command a sort of a sense of respect and authority, as if they have some sort of moral knowledge not available to others. And it's obviously we know the opposite's often true.
Yeah. You see quite often, the news stories about bishops behaving badly and feathering their nest and doing sexual things that they tell other people not to do. So, they're just people, they're just men, but they appear to have these, or they proclaim themselves to have this special moral insight that's denied to other people.
I'm a little bit confused. I think these laws in Britain, obviously, to protect people and groups from discrimination, but they seem to get a little bit hazy when you mix that with the right to religion as well?
Yes, religious exemptions from the Equality Act are quite wider than I would like them to be. We fought every step of the way since the Equality Act came in to try and stop religion getting more and more exemptions. And of course, we've had a lot of court cases as well, trying to extend the kind of privileges that religion have in equality law, and they've succeeded to an extent in widening the exemptions, but so far we've stopped them having a complete opt-out.
I wanted to touch back on collective worship, which you just spoke about there. I assume that's possibly something you get a lot of contact from parents who are concerned about as well. My last podcast I did was on secular parenting. Got some people to talk about raising your children in a secular environment, and that was the episode that got the most amount of feedback and questions, and people generally concerned and not knowing what to do. Children are coming home learning one thing when they have a different view. Is that the sort of thing you hear daily?
Oh, all the time. This is by far the biggest issue for members of the NSS, and as you say, it really is a daily occurrence that we get emails from parents saying, my kid's coming home telling me that the teacher said that they would burn in hell if they didn't believe in Jesus, and that kind of thing. And, they challenge the school, but it's like banging their heads against a brick wall. And the school will then say, well, you have the option of withdrawing your child from collective worship and from religious education. But a lot of parents are just not prepared to do that because, it makes their child stand out, and it's the last thing that young children want is to be different from their classmates and to be singled out as different. So a lot of the parents just go along with it, even though it makes them really furious. But as I say, it is a legal requirement for schools to do this and to provide religious education. So in effect, there are no secular schools in this country, even the ones that are run by local authorities and are not under religious control. They still have to provide religious education. They still have to have this mandatory daily act of worship. And I think, there's something very wrong with that, forcing people to worship, even when it's against their will. It just seems that in any other context, if you said we're going to force you to worship, it would be a huge breach of a person's human rights. But it seems to be acceptable in school. You can do it to kids, something that you would never be able to do to an adult.
Yeah, I mean, parents are stuck in a very difficult situation as well, where they want the best education for the children, and by and large, faith schools, well, because of the selection process and the ability to vet, do quite well in terms of ratings and grades and things like that. And I've heard from parents who have never stepped foot in a church since they was christened, which seems to happen more out of tradition in sort of my circles nowadays, but they'll have to sort of attend a church service in order to ensure qualification for the children into the best schools.
Yeah. I mean, the local Church of England school near me, you have to attend 50 church services every year, even to get on the waiting list. And that's not just the parents, that's the kids too. So, and people do it. Even though they're not in the least bit interested. And not only that, but you get extra points on the waiting list if you do things to help the church, like flower arranging and cleaning and bell ringing and all that kind of thing. I thought all this had been stopped by the government, but they're still doing it at my local church school.
What would you say to people who would say we're a Christian country?
Well, it all depends what you mean by a Christian country. I mean, the latest
no one
research... knows. Yeah, the latest research seems to suggest that half the population say that they're Christian, half of them don't. But it's well known that when people are asked by researchers about religion, they tend to exaggerate. And I was reading some research by an organization called Christian Research that does a lot of statistics gathering. And the man who runs that says that he thinks that there's as much as a third of exaggeration amongst people who claim that they go to church or claim that they're Christian and claim that they believe in God. He said it's because people feel slightly guilty if they say otherwise. So when they tell researchers, oh yes, I go to church once a month, he thinks that at least a third of them are lying. And I think that the figures for the number of non-Christians, non-believers, or non-religious people in this country is far more than 50%. It's much more likely to be around 70%, if not more. And certainly, if you measure it by the number of people who actually go to church, it's a tiny number. The church statistics are about 5% on an average Sunday of the population. That's actually counting bums on pews rather than what people tell researchers. So I think, it's not really a Christian country. I mean, constitutionally, yes, we're a Christian country because we have an established Christian church. But, in the hearts of the people, no, we're not.
I love the study that the Church of England tried to skew in their favour not so long ago about prayer. I think they phrased it, the question that they surveyed people with was, it's something like, irrespective of whether or not you pray, if you were to pray, what would you pray for? And it's so the 81% of people gave an answer, and that the Church of England went with 4 out of 5 people believe in the power of prayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like asking, irrespective of whether you have a magic carpet, if you did, where would you fly to first?
Yeah.
And it's silly. So I've noticed that, I think I've got a sneaky suspicion as well that a lot of people in opposition to what they see as sort of Islam increasing in Britain, they seem to identify Christian with British.
Yeah, absolutely. It has become a cipher. It's become a cipher because of the rise of Islam. You're right about that.
Yeah, I get the impression, I mean, people I know, family members who are not devout in any sense, when the census comes around, it's British Christian without fail,
yeah.
which I think possibly do better to explain to people that these are the kind of things that the government use to justify the faith schools and the faith-based initiatives and things like that.
Absolutely, and I do agree with you that it's very difficult. We have 2,000 years of cultural Christianity underlying this country, so it's difficult to shake it off. It's happening slowly, but it won't happen overnight. I mean, the founder of the National Secular Society, Charles Bradlaugh, once said, "No man sees a religion die," and that's true because it's a very long process. But religions do die. History is absolutely strewn by the bodies of defunct religions. And I think that Christianity will eventually go the same way. So will Islam. But whether something else emerges to take its place, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll just be paving the way for Scientology, I imagine. One of the good things, though, I was in attendance at the NSS conference. I think it was 2012 when Dawkins and Nick Cohen and Mariam Namasi were there, and to look around, there was lots of really young faces, which it was my first conference, and I was quite surprised. So that's quite promising. We've seen a lot of the younger generation who will obviously become the adults, the lawmakers, who are actually really engaged in secular sort of issues, which is really promising.
Yeah, I think this is just about the first generation that has thought that there is an alternative, that you can get through life without religion, or at least you can get through life without actually being anti-religious, but you don't have to believe it if you don't want to. And this is really only the first or second generation that's had that option, really. And I have to say that Dawkins's book and Christopher Hitchens and so on did liberate an awful lot of people from the idea that you've got to believe something. And he put the idea into a lot of people's heads that no, actually, you don't have to believe something. You don't have to believe anything if you don't want to. And it was a liberating experience for an awful lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd recommend anybody, if they haven't already, seek out the works of Dawkins and Hitchens, and obviously people like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett do a lot of good work. I mean, I used to be able to lose at least 4 hours on YouTube just looking at Christopher Hitchens' debate.
Yeah, that's the other thing, of course. The internet has also given us a platform that's been denied to us in previous generations.
Yeah.
To actually imagine that you could talk about atheism in all its aspects, and in secularism and humanism and all the other things that have traditionally been denied a voice in the mainstream media. Every newspaper in this country used to have religion column. They don't all have it now. Some of them still have religion correspondence. But with the internet, we can all have our say now. It's democratized us so to the extent where atheism is really easily available, all aspects of it, all arguments about it, all arguments against it. You can think about it, and knowledge is there to help you to make a decision about what you believe or what you don't believe, and that's never happened before. So I think the internet has freed us from the sort of hegemony of religion, where you could not escape from it, where there was never they made sure there was no alternative, that the alternatives were denied a voice. So we're no longer this kind of cranky minority as they would have liked to have portrayed us before, when they had all the microphones. We've got our own microphones now, and we can shout back.
Yeah, I think Google's pretty much killed God.
Yeah, well, certainly for a lot of people it has. Unfortunately, they use it too, so it's also sort of given the fanatics
that's
voice.
True.
Some of the stuff I read on the internet is actually quite frightening.
Yeah, news articles are often the worst as well. If you have a look at the comment sections, notably Sky News, it's not good for your blood pressure. I wanted to touch a little bit on ritual slaughter because that's been big in the British press the last few weeks or so. I think John Blackwell, the head of the British Veterinary Association, came out in opposition to ritual slaughter, quite vocally, in fact. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the differences between halal meat and kosher and how they inform the processes of slaughter.
Yeah, well, as far as I understand it, they're the same process. The animal is hung upside down, its throat is cut, and it bleeds to death. That's the same in halal and kosher butchery, but the only difference is that they chant a different prayer over them while they're dying. And that's basically the difference between halal and kosher. But I think that it's an issue that really gets people because the empathy and the sympathy that we have for animals these days is a lot more than it ever has been before in human history. And I think that we have the luxury now to regard animals as something more than just food to be hunted or whatever. We can now see them as sentient beings with kind of not feelings exactly in the same way that human beings have feelings. I mean, emotional feelings, but we can empathize with pain and suffering when we see animals suffer. We know that they're suffering, and we empathize with that. And I think that has raised the issue of ritual slaughter and how awful and cruel it is for a lot of people. And it's one of the issues, I have to say, after education, it's one of the issues that really sparks amongst our members. Whenever we put it on the Facebook page, it's the one that gets the biggest number of comments after faith schools.
Right. I mean, it seems clear to me that the processes the governmental attitude towards ritual slaughter favours religious sensibility over animal welfare quite clearly.
Yeah, this idea that you know it's an abuse of religious freedom to interfere with kosher and halal slaughter. But of course, what they're saying is that the animal should be stunned before its throat is cut. So, you know, that it just seems a little bit perverse to me that they don't even want to do that. They want the animal to be conscious while it's dying. And I just don't understand it. I mean, the animal is alive, although it's unconscious if it's been stunned. And certainly in other forms of slaughter, you know, the kind of slaughter, normal slaughter, if you like, all the animals are stunned and then killed. And I don't see why it's so difficult for Jews and Muslims to accept that although the animal is unconscious, it's still being slaughtered in the way that they want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think am I right in saying that with halal meat, which is the Islamic tradition, there is some leeway in terms of stunning. I think the majority of halal meat is pre-stunned, whereas kosher is more rigid and there is no stunning accepted. Yeah,
that's right. And I think often it's when they're making the case in the Jewish press and in the Muslim press, they usually say, halal slaughter banned. But in Denmark, where the controversy is focused at the moment, because they've just banned these kinds of ritual slaughter without pre-stunning, they can still do the ritual slaughter, but the animal has to be stunned. So it hasn't been banned totally. They haven't said, you cannot bleed an animal to death. They've just said you can't do it unless the animal is unconscious. So it's not true that Denmark has banned that kind of slaughter. They've just said it has to be modified so the animal doesn't suffer. We're absolutely sure the animal is not suffering.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that used to annoy me, I mean, I'm actually a vegetarian myself, I don't eat meat, but back when I did, one of the things that used to frustrate me greatly was the fact that I couldn't protest with my wallet, because kosher halal food is not labelled as such, so you've no idea half the time when you're picking up how the animal's been treated. And I know that's something that the NSS has been campaigning for quite some time. I was wondering if there's been any sort of updates on whether they're looking to introduce labels in that manner.
There is some talk. I think there's going to be a debate in the European Parliament about it. But again, they're under enormous pressure from the Jewish lobby because in kosher slaughter, there's only certain parts of the animal that is used for Jewish consumption. The rest of it has to be put into the general food chain because if it wasn't, it would be wasted, and the whole kosher industry would become, they just wouldn't be able to economically sustain it. So that's why there's such a resistance to any kind of modification of kosher slaughter, particularly, simply because it would be uneconomic for them not to be able to put the residual meat that they're not going to use into the general food chain. So yes, every hamburger and beef burger and sausage and so on that you eat now has probably got some halal or kosher meat in it.
Yeah, so the lack of choice is a big problem, really, I suppose. Moving on to something a little bit more positive, there's a big date in the secular calendar coming up for Secularist of the Year on the 29th of March, I believe.
Yes.
What would we expect to see there if we grabbed a ticket?
Well, it's a great event. I really enjoy it because I think we're in about our 9th year now. And it's a £5,000 prize, which is sponsored by Dr. Michael Irwin, who is a campaigner for dignity in dying and for the right to assisted suicide. And he's been sponsoring it for all this time. He comes every year and helps us present the prize. This year we've got Kerry McCarthy, who I believe is a member of the Shadow Cabinet. She's an MP, a member of the Shadow Cabinet, and a lovely lineup of potential winners. There's Abhishek and Chris, who were in the Jesus and No controversy at the college in London. And Nick Cohen's also been nominated, and Shafak Parvi, who's a Turkish MP, and who else is there? And Geeta Sahgal, who's a women's rights campaigner in India. All kinds of interesting people, and we've got a really good crowd coming this year.
That's great. I mean, I had Chris Morse on my show not so long ago to speak about the controversy at LSE, and a very, very smart guy. But back to what we were saying before about the way information travels on the internet. So something like what he and his colleagues experienced would have gone unreported, undocumented, unchallenged quite some time ago. But the fact that he can reach out to these organisations now, people on the internet spread it like wildfire, and eventually we sort of got the resolution on that we hoped for. Yes,
and it was very gratifying. But going back to the internet, one of my experiences of it was the Protest the Pope campaign that we launched when Pope Benedict came here a few years ago. And again, that would never have happened in the way that it did unless we'd had access to the internet, unless we could let people know about it through the internet. And when we set up a petition objecting to the amount of taxpayers' money that was being spent on this visit, it got, tens of thousands of signatures almost immediately. And that was something that the mainstream press couldn't ignore. And when they took that up, then it got big. And then the internet started to crank up, and it all went viral. And we ended up with 20,000 people on the streets. Now, that would never have happened.
That's incredible.
Without the internet. It could not have happened because the papers wouldn't have mentioned that there was any kind of resistance to the Pope's visit. They wouldn't have mentioned it at all unless we had forced them into it by sheer weight of numbers.
That's great. I mean, I was wondering if you could tell us some of the main ways people can support the National Secular Society.
Well, I think that the main thing is to join. We do need members. We've got an awful lot of supporters. We have 2 million visitors to our website every year, and tens of thousands on the Facebook page. And I think, well, why don't these people join? Why, they feel so passionately, and it's quite clear that they do when they write on the Facebook page. Why don't they join? Why don't they take the next step? And if we could show a huge amount of formal support, it would strengthen our cause no end. So joining is one thing, but the other thing is, I think that people should start to think about how they can take the secular message into their own lives. And I often look at the way that Christians are often at the heart of things like school governors and politics, local political parties and so on. It's always the Christians who are there, and they always dictate the policies. I just noticed in my local neighborhood watch group that it's been taken over by Christians, and the money that's been raised by the local community association is being donated to churches, and that's the way they do it. You see, they're prepared to get involved in civic life and promote their religion. I think we've got to start thinking about that too. We've got to start looking at how secularism can be promoted through local politics, through school governorships, through maybe even becoming an MP, and saying, I'm a secularist MP, like the Christians are always telling us that they're Christian MPs. We've got to get involved in the workings of this country to make sure that our voices are heard there too, because that's where the decisions are made.
Absolutely, it's vital that people get behind the secular organisations. I completely agree. I do have a few questions for you from people on Twitter, so bear in mind I'm not responsible for any of these nicknames. We've got one from a lady called Fictitious Phyllis. She says, the term secular has become a derogatory term thanks to certain churches. Is it salvageable?
I think so. I think what we have to do is make sure that because we're all guilty of it, we use the terms like secular and humanist and atheist and free thinker. We use them all sort of interchangeably. I think we have to make sure that secularism is clearly defined when we use it ourselves. We have to make sure that it's seen as a political ideology rather than a belief system. And the other thing is that the other elements of secularism or secularization are quite different, really. Secularization is this process of a country or a society losing its interest in religion and becoming itself secular, that is to say, non-religious. That's not quite the same as secularism, which is, as I say, the political process of separating religion from politics. It gets a bit complicated, but I think we need to use the terms correctly. If we're talking about humanism, let's talk about humanism about what it is, rather than using the terms interchangeably, and that will help clear up the confusion. But I don't think we ought to abandon the word secular simply because the religious bodies who feel threatened by it are misrepresenting it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've noticed there's this trend, and it happens with atheism as well, but they like to stick the word aggressive in front of secularism now. I think Baroness Vars is guilty of it. I think the last Pope said something similar, and it never made any sense to me. It was sort of like saying militant fairness. Yeah,
if you think that a secularist is somebody who believes in separation of church and state, well, most Americans are secularists. I wouldn't say that they're militant secularists. In fact, most of them are religious, but that they are secular in the sense that they don't live under a religious yoke, and politically, that is to say. The same with the French. Every French person is secular in the sense that they're citizens of a secular nation. So it's not kind of extremist ideology. They tried to make out, that Pol Pot and Hitler, you've heard it all before.
Yeah.
All these dreadful people, Stalin were all secularists. Well, they weren't actually, not in a democratic sense. They were dictators who were against religion because religion posed a threat to their own power structure. A secularist is not really out to destroy religion, but just to say we've got to live together and you can't have privileges.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to touch on as well. I don't think a lot of people realise that secularism protects religion as well. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's certainly the case in the American form of secularism. The Constitution actually protects religion. It says that religion is there for every citizen, and it will be protected from interference by the state. And that means every religion. It doesn't mean Christianity. At the moment, you've got the evangelicals in America trying desperately to claim that America is a Christian nation and that Christianity should be written into the Constitution. Well, the founding fathers had a brainwave, a quite brilliant brainwave, in saying, well, if we make it secular, we will be free from the kind of religious warfare that's plagued Europe for centuries. If we say no religion can have power in the state, then you don't get religion fighting over who's in charge. And it's protected them. They haven't had the religious warfare that Europe has been subjected to. You haven't had Catholics and Protestants fighting each other for power. And I think that was an absolute stroke of genius on their part to do that. But yes, it does protect religion. It says, you are free to follow your religion, whatever it is. So Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs are all free in America to worship as they please, and they're not second-class citizens.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as good as America is, and that I think they could do with being reminded of the First Amendment once in a while, perhaps.
Yes, of course. If you read the American press, which I do quite a lot, you see the huge struggle that's going on there at the moment with these very determined evangelical Christians from the Deep South desperately trying to overturn the meaning of the First Amendment, so that it appears to mean that America belongs to them and that they will run it on their terms. Well, it hasn't happened yet, but it doesn't stop them trying.
No. A question from Watford Atheist. They ask, what can we do as individuals to tackle de facto blasphemy laws?
We have to keep trying to challenge them. When I know what they mean by de facto blasphemy laws. I see it all the time. It's this idea that people must not be offended if they're religious. And we saw it last week with this program on BBC Three, where they were broadcasting from the car park of a mosque, and that somebody wanted to ask the question, when will it be right to be gay and a Muslim? And when the mosque found out that the BBC were going to ask this question during this program, they said, well, no, we don't want you to. And the BBC immediately backed down and withdrew from that debate, from the program. And that's a kind of censorship that amounts to blasphemy law, really, because it only seems to apply to religious people. They can dictate what is sacred and what is not sacred, what offends them and what doesn't, and just about everything seems to offend them. And I think we have to challenge that at every time we see it happening. It was the same with the Jesus and Mo T-shirts. Somebody said, we're offended, and immediately the authorities say, remove that because it's offending people. And it was simply because it was a religious symbol, and that is a blasphemy law, or an enforcement of anti-blasphemy. We thought we got rid of the blasphemy law when it was repealed a few years ago, but it seems to be re-emerging in different forms. and it's mostly Islam that is demanding that people respect the religion and are punished if they don't respect the religion. And now you've got people, just last week there was a man in court who was fined for ripping up a Quran. And it was his own Quran, he hadn't stolen it from anybody. And as far as I'm concerned, he'd ripped up a book. And if it was Charles Dickens that he'd ripped up, I wouldn't have been happy about it, but I wouldn't have wanted him to be sent to jail or taken to court.
Exactly, yeah.
But the fact that somebody thinks this particular book is sacred means that they do get taken to court, and I think that is blasphemy by any other name.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of destroying literature, but I support anyone else's right to be an idiot.
Yeah.
In that context.
Yeah, I'm sure he was trying to be provocative, this man. I'm sure he wasn't doing it from the best of intentions. But I think it's his right to do that. I mean, he was ripping up paper. You could see it that way if you wanted to. But if you don't want to, if you decide that it's a sacred piece of paper and that it's an insult to your religion and that your religion is automatically protected by law, then you've got blasphemy.
Exactly. I mean, I understand as somebody who understands how important free speech is, you often have to fight for things that are offensive to yourself.
Yes, and certainly that problem with these street preachers who preach against, they stand on a soapbox in the local shopping centre and start shouting about the evils of homosexuality, and occasionally that upsets people, and people send for the police and say, I don't like what he's saying, and the police haul them away. But I don't think that's right. I think they should be able to say what they want to say, even though I don't agree with it. I think they should have the right to say it, and I should have the right to argue with them, and I should argue with them and not demand that they get arrested. That's what free speech is about. You can't have partial free speech. It's got to be free speech for everybody, or it's not free speech.
I mean, I don't mind, obviously, street preachers, as long as they take the 5 minutes to check the grammar and the spelling of the various placards. I'm quite happy then. Last question. I'm not entirely sure if this is on your radar, but Simon Russell has asked your views on the increasing religious agenda on the government policy in Spain, most recently to repeal the right to abortion. Yeah.
Yes, that is, it's quite worrying what's happening in Spain. Of course, a few years ago you had the Zapatero government, a very left-leaning government, which was very liberal in social issues and one of the first southern European countries to legalize gay marriage and to relax the restrictions on abortion. It did all the things that people wanted it to do and made Spain a much more open country, less under the thumb of the Catholic Church as it had been for so many years since the Franco era. And, they were even talking about removing the church tax, which is levied on Spanish people. They didn't actually get round to doing that because there's one thing that the church will resist, and that's people taking its money away from it. But now you've got a right-wing government in power, and the church is back at the centre of politics and is demanding that all these reforms be pushed back. But certainly on the gay marriage thing, they've lost that one because public opinion was not behind them. But on the abortion issue, I think they are going to manage to push it back. It's very worrying to see how quickly the Catholic Church can re-establish itself as a political force. Even when you think it's been pushed out, it just waits in the wings for its opportunity to come back. And I have a feeling that the same thing is happening in Ireland, where the Catholic Church disgraced itself terribly during the child abuse crisis. And it became a sort of post-Catholic country. But now we've got this new smiley pope, photo op Francis, as I call him.
Yeah.
He's in, and the Catholic Church is starting to worm its way back, and I think that will be tragic for Ireland.
I'm incredibly unimpressed with the new pope. I mean, from all I can see, nothing's changed apart from the tone.
Yeah, nothing will change because he's actually a conservative underneath all this. The jolly PR frontage. It's a really thin veneer that he's got overlaying what he stands for. And he's not going to change anything in any fundamental way. He just keeps putting out these tantalizing little tidbits that the media jump on and exaggerate and make it appear that he's going to be ever so liberal tomorrow, and he isn't.
All right, Terry. Well, we're just approaching the hour mark now, and I've got through the main bulk of questions I was going to ask. I was just wondering if there's anything you wanted to add, or if you feel there's anything we've not touched on.
Oh, lots. Yeah, the NSS is involved in endless campaigns. Sometimes I wonder how on earth we keep all the balls in the air. But we're on at the moment. Our next campaign will be on chancel repairs. This is an ancient law that allows the church to demand payment from local parishioners to repair their churches. It's a law that dates back to Henry VIII's time, and when you're repairing these ancient churches, it can be very, very expensive. Running into tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. And the church in some parts of the country that have got medieval, really medieval churches pre-Henry VIII, they can claim the cost of these repairs from people living in the local area. We think this is absolutely iniquitous, and so that's our next campaign, to try and get that law overturned and to get the church's hands out of people's pockets.
Just out of interest, are the churches actually trying to enforce this law at the moment?
Yes, they are, and only over the last 6 months they've been sending out notifications to people who are subject to this law, telling them that they're subject to it. And it blights their house value, because people will not buy a house with this liability hanging over it, with an unlimited, unspecified amount that the church could claim. So people are finding that their houses are unsellable and valueless because of this liability. We think that is just not acceptable.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, if anyone's listening who's in a situation where they are getting letters like that through the door, log on to the NSS.
Yes, please contact us, because we're gathering information at the moment from all around the country, and we're in touch with people who are absolutely distraught that the asset which they thought was their most valuable is now more or less blighted because of this charge that the church could levy at any time.
Well, I've really enjoyed speaking to you anyway. It's been really nice.
Good, thank you very much, and I've enjoyed chit-chatting.
Yeah, it's been great.
All right then, thanks very much.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks as well to Terry Sanderson for giving up his time to come on the show and just being an absolute gentleman at the same time. You can find out and get involved in and perhaps become a member at secularism.org.uk. Don't forget to let me know about any local secular organisations you find out about on Twitter, that's at gspellchecker. It gives me great pleasure to doff my cap in the general direction of Andrew Emerson, Brian Gerfert, Bruce Turnbull, Prayesh Patel and Joanne Swing, all kind enough to donate to the hosting costs of the G-Spellchecker podcast, which you can do so at gspellchecker.wordpress.com. Thanks very much for listening.